Ladies and gentlemen,
I take great pride in presenting
The world. Radio.
Paris.
Paris.
Paris, France.
C'est Paris.
Welcome to World Radio Paris Presents. My name is Arbel Murray, and today I am here with Robynne Pendariès. She is an ADHD coach for adults. She lives and works in France, but works with clients from all over the world. Hello, Robynne. Welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So I know you from around town, hanging out in some of the English-speaking associations that we both frequent, one being Message Paris, and Message Paris, by the way, which is a association for English-speaking parents and caregivers in the Paris region. So I would love to hear from you a brief origin story. How you're American, I assume.
I am American. I actually moved over here to Paris 1 week after I graduated college. So I remember thinking, don't look back or you might change your mind. Mm-hmm. And when I arrived, I was already with my husband, now husband, then boyfriend. And when I arrived, I worked in the Sentier in Paris, which is the clothing district, in a clothing company. And afterwards, I spent some time raising my 2 children. And then afterwards, I was looking for some kind of entrepreneurship, something where I would have more autonomy. And I became a professional organizer. Some people know Marie Kondo, who is a Japanese woman who did that. And
She's the one that says, if it doesn't bring you joy, throw it in the garbage, right?
If it doesn't spark joy. She
right.
was probably the one who said that, yes.
Right.
which is a great idea. In any case, so I was working mostly with English-speaking clients, some of them expats, but not necessarily. And I realized after a while that there were some of my clients that just related differently to their stuff, to their paperwork, to their emotions, to how they spent their time. And I didn't really understand why I could not put my finger on it. And after maybe about 3 years of working in the organizing world, I met this gentleman who told me that he had ADHD and was taking medication for it. And he asked me to come over and see his office and help him out. And that just opened up a whole nother world to me. And all of a sudden I realized the pieces of the puzzle were coming together. And not only did I realize how many of my clients, my organizing clients, had ADHD, but I also realized that I suspected that my husband had ADHD at the time. So he wasn't ready to go down that road, but I continued to work with these organizing clients with ADHD and continued to learn more about it, and it just fascinated me. I studied child psychology in college, so anything that has to do with psychology or the way the brain functions or the way people feel and relate to other people was just fascinating to me. So fast forward to a couple of years ago when my daughter was getting ready to go off to college, and I had an inkling and got her diagnosed, and she was diagnosed officially with ADHD, and she went off to college, and she started working with an ADHD coach there. And she was telling me...
Was this in America?
This was in America,
okay.
Yes. By the way, she said, Mom, and it's free. And I said, no, it's not free. It's included in the price of the college. Mm-hmm. In any case, so she was telling me how helpful it was to her with her general skills and getting organized at college. And as she was telling me that, I realized, oh my gosh, I could totally do that. And then I paused for a second and I realized I actually already do that. I was doing it for years with my clients. I was coaching my husband and my daughter without realizing that they had ADHD. So I went back to school online. This is during COVID. That was not easy. There were a lot of late nights because it was a program in the United States, so because of the time difference. And then my husband also got officially diagnosed with ADHD. So I realized when I took this course, even though I was coming at it from a personal level to be a better wife, a better mother, from a professional level, it kind of all fell into place. And I realized this is really what I want to do. It's going deeper than just helping people organize their junk drawer, I guess.
Can you tell me about that first client when you walked into his office? What was it about the way in which people with ADHD are specifically disorganized, or what is it about the way they order or do not order their things that clicked with you, that made you realize, okay, this is different from people who just need help getting a handle on their paperwork and where to file things?
So are you ready for the answer?
I am.
This is a doozy. So this gentleman, again, he was an entrepreneur. He had his own company, had a translating company. And I went into his office not knowing what to expect because I really didn't know. This was 15 years ago. And ADHD, people were talking about it a little bit in relation to kids who are hyperactive, who take Ritalin. But the landscape was really, in terms of adults with ADHD, was very...
Overgrown, unknown.
No, it was unknown.
Right.
In any case, so I walked into this man's office and he had his papers everywhere laid out flat in piles. There was nothing that was filed. There was nothing that was vertical. It was all horizontal. And luckily he had the space to do it, but that was like quite a first impression. And I said to him, what is your impetus to do that? What's the reason? And he said, if I put anything away, it actually just disappears. Out of sight, out of mind. So that was the first thing. I was like, okay, that's interesting. It's called object permanence. It is a thing with people with ADHD. And afterwards, he showed me 2 pieces of paper. One piece of paper was, so this came in his mailbox for his company. One piece of paper was just pure advertising, and it said, 3 ink cartridges for the price of 2.
Right.
Or 2 ink cartridges for the price of 3, whatever. And the other piece of paper was from the tax office saying, you owe us 20,000 euros, and if you do not pay this now, immediately we will close your company. And he showed me these 2 pieces of paper, and I kid you not, he said to me, I don't understand the difference between these 2 pieces of paper. I don't know what is important or not. I don't know what I'm supposed to prioritize. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. So I get myself worked up and overwhelmed, and I just put the pieces of paper away and don't do anything. And I was thinking, wow, this is a serious disability, actually. I remember thinking that at the time. So that's an extreme case, I would say, but it does bring up, certain issues in relation to adult ADHD that can be very debilitating.
What I automatically think of is a lot of my best friends and neighbors, and a lot of these people I'm going to mention are older. My neighbors and close confidants in Greenwich Village, New York, oftentimes I think we would look at them and call them hoarders, but it wasn't hoarding exactly, right? There wasn't just piles of garbage or dirty plates that they didn't know what to do with. These items, papers, pieces of mail, every single piece was almost like a moment represented by ephemera for them, and they just didn't know how to categorize it or how to take away its importance or how to even gauge or rank the importance. Just like you're saying. So it all just went in what looks like a slow moving tornado inside a tiny apartment. And I think maybe New York is like Paris with the small spaces and you can really see it. But that's what it makes me think of.
Well, there is a very high correlation between hoarding, which is actually considered to be a mental disorder, and ADHD as well, too. And it is absolutely for those reasons, because one piece of mail comes in, just one piece, and you need to know what to do with it. You need to know if it's important. You need to know if it's not important to throw it away. You need to know how to classify it. You need to know what to do, what to take action on. And all these things are calling on people's executive functions and these skills that are challenging for people with an ADHD brain.
What have you found is the general attitude in France toward ADHD? I mean, you've lived here since
35 years.
35 years. You've lived here for 35 years. You've raised your kids here. And you've probably seen this evolution of change in regard to this particular type of neurodivergence. A type of neurodivergence that would previously be considered either a quirk or, for some people who have managed to organize their time correctly, maybe a genius or what have you. And what have you seen in the attitude in French society around ADHD, and how has that changed?
I would say that, like some other parts of French culture and society, we, because I have my French nationality now, so maybe I should say we, the French, are definitely behind the Anglo-Saxon countries in how, in the approach towards neurodivergence and differences. I mean, I saw it actually when my kids did start going to school, and I saw to what extent they were expected from this young age to fit into the mold and to think like everybody else and behave like everybody else. And if your child does not fit into the mold, it's very, very challenging for the child and also for the parents, for the families. So I have seen more schools here in Paris crop up or pop up that are accepting, and even sometimes just for kids who are neurodivergent, so mostly for kids with ADHD or with autism spectrum disorder as well too, and other kinds of what they call DYS, so dyslexia, dyscalculia, all these things. So, but it's a shame that it's a different structure and that it's not more accepted in the schools in general. And then I would say fast forward to later on beyond the schools in the workplace, I would say it's moving in the right direction for sure, but it's very slow. But it is moving in the right direction. There have been certain laws that have been put into place within certain corporations that need to follow these laws about how many people that they need to hire who are labeled neurodivergent or with some kind of disability.
Oh, really?
Yes. The sad thing is that we are still at a point in French society where it's not very well accepted and looked upon. So most of the people who actually are officially diagnosed with ADHD, they keep quiet and they continue to mask in the workplace. And that saps a huge amount of energy. And it can be very, very difficult for people. So yes, it's going in the right direction, but there's still so far to go.
And where I'm from in New York, the school system integrates with specialty education for neurodivergent people, whether it's autism spectrum or ADHD, which can be wildly different. And here it seems to me that it's a different structure, as you said. It's like one is medical and then one side is education. And they're just starting to kind of intertwine them in a way that like allows for this structure to have an alternative.
I would say that people's mentalities are going to change when it changes within the school systems, almost like from the bottom up. Right. And so the more openness there is to kids that think differently and behave differently, and the more and then the laws that change also too, that will allow these kids to be integrated and to still be supported in the mainstream school system. I think that little by little, and the awareness will be created, and the stigma hopefully will drop.
Inside the same classrooms.
Absolutely, yeah.
It seems like it would be very hard to do, since to me, as a newcomer to French culture is very dependent on these structures for their community, for their culture, for their ideas about secularism, their ideas about the equalizing principle of everyone gets the same. And a lot of these notions, these noble, amazing, awesome foundational notions are dependent on rigorous structure. And I wonder what that's going to look like in the future. So if you were to say, what would a workplace, I don't know if you could speak to what would a school look like, but what could a workplace look like that integrated both neurotypical, I guess they call them, and neurodivergent people?
Well, I mean, I have a very clear vision of what I would hope for in the future, because I have a lot of clients that I work with who have ADHD, and they talk to me about the challenges that they have in the workplace, whether it be with the lighting, or whether it be with being able to work at home more often, or whether it be with being isolated and not working in an open space so that they won't constantly be interrupted in their thoughts and in their work. So there are a lot of small things, I would say, that can be implemented, but the people who are the powers that be or who are making those decisions in the workplace need to be accepting of those differences
Right.
from the get-go.
What do you say to the idea that there are no real neurotypicals? Have you
I
ever
love that
been,
question.
I mean, because part of me, I don't necessarily personally identify with every ADHD symptom, but I feel like both me and many people I know and myself identify with smatterings of symptoms across the neurodivergent board, let's say, whether it's like sensitivity to auditory stimulus or a need for certain order in certain aspects, but no order in others in order to create or work.
So there's something that we say in our milieu. We say, if you've met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. So everybody is unique and everybody is different. But the fact that it actually does present so differently from one person to another, there are things in common. There's a lot of overlap also too with autism spectrum disorder traits and with gifted traits. This is one of the reasons why it's so hard to diagnose. And not just hard, it's like tricky, I guess, would be a better word for that. I like to say also too that ADHD is the worst name for a disorder that ever existed.
Why?
Well, first of all, I don't think it's a disorder. I really do believe that it's a brain difference and that we all have different brains. So unfortunately or unfortunately, in order to get the support, whether that be medication or sometimes support from the community or financial aid, whatever it is, people in certain countries need to have a formal diagnosis. So if you have a formal diagnosis, you have to put a framework around it, right? With characteristics and with a name. So you have to label it. So
you can't just call it like Dostoevskian brain fever syndrome.
Quirky brain. No, you can't. And also the attention deficit part too is very, like in French you say réducteur. I don't know how you would say it in English. Well, it's derogatory, I guess, and people can say, wait a second, I can pay attention really well when I want. I don't have a deficit of attention, which is also true, is that the brain, an ADHD brain is challenged by regulation of attention. So sometimes you can, if you're not interested in something or if it doesn't excite you, you will not pay attention to it at all. And sometimes you will have this, what we call hyperfocus, where you can focus for hours on something if you're interested in it. So that also creates this confusion around the name. And there are a lot of people in the ADHD world that are trying very hard to get the name changed.
But what does, we all have different brains and there is some overlap. What is a neurotypical, I guess, by your definition? How would you define a neurotypical?
Well, I mean, there are definitely parts of the brain that if I'm going to put myself in that box of neurotypical, and then should I put you in the neurodivergent box, or you don't want to be put into a box? Maybe?
I don't know. Like I have a 4-year-old, so like I think there's part of me that thinks anyone in the first like 6 years of parenthood shouldn't be allowed to be diagnosed with anything except like help.
Okay.
Needs
some
help.
support.
Right.
Well, I would say that, somebody who we're going to be calling neurotypical, their executive functions, which are in the prefrontal lobe, so that's regulating your emotions, that is organizing, it's time management, all of these things, we are going to have less of a challenge, just functioning in everyday life, calling on those skills. Mm-hmm. Whereas people who are neuroatypical or neurodivergent are going to be much stronger in seeing the bigger picture, in creativity, in handling stress in an emergency. So it's just a question of it's not one brain is better. It's just that one brain and then the next person's brain is just different. There's a really interesting theory that could be called an evolutionary theory in relation to ADHD, whereby people who are neurodivergent, specifically with ADHD, that long time ago, their brains were much better adapted to going out and hunting, to gathering, whatever it is, the skills that people needed thousands of years ago in order to survive. And that over time, the people with those brains, especially in the last, barely 100 years, those type of brains have become less adapted to this hyper technological and hyper organized society and hyper structured society that we live in now.
Hyper-productive, post-industrial revolution, hyper-productive world. Yeah.
Correct. And I really believe that, actually. I really believe that.
What I'm really interested in is can you walk me through a day of ADHD? Not a day of ADHD coaching, but maybe a session or a type of curriculum, would you call it? You meet someone and they're like, hey, I got ADHD. Because I don't know, they're in a Italian-American movie from the 1980s. And they say, can you help me? What is your process like?
The first thing I would do when I meet this person is smile with lots of compassion, because as the wife of a person with ADHD and a mother of a person with ADHD, I have a lot of compassion, even though I can't put myself in their shoes. I understand as well as possible that it's something that can be very challenging, but also something that can be very, very positive. So that's my first, that's how I show up in the beginning. After that, the coaching sessions do have more structure than maybe if you would go see a therapist and you just want to have talk therapy, whether it be about your ADHD or something else. So the structure is as follows. We start by talking about the topic of the day, and the topic of the day is what the person, my client, will choose. I don't impose anything on them. There are plenty of subjects to talk about because ADHD affects every aspect of our lives, of their lives. So the first thing is, what's the subject of the day? So they'll tell me what the subject of the day is, and then we will go to a debriefing, and we'll talk about what happened since our last session. And the point of that is to anchor any kind of learning. So if the person decided that they were going to call their mother that they had been procrastinating about to talk about, some kind of sensitive subject, if that was their action step that they were going to take in between sessions, then we would do this debriefing. And it's not, I did it or I didn't do it. It's, what did you learn about yourself? What was the obstacle if you didn't do it? How did you feel in your body when you did it? How did you feel afterwards? So it's basically, coaching is a way of rewiring your brain so that your brain is not going to those negative or unhealthy or unhelpful pathways and defaults. So it's a question of rewiring it. How can you think more positive? How can you create this life that fits so that it fits your brain?
I didn't do it again. I'm the worst. Why didn't I do that? Why can't I get it together?
There's a lot of that.
I'm specifically saying all those things without curses, but this, it echoes a lot. I used to work in, very hectic newsrooms. And I'm not saying anything about journalists, but I am going to say that this sounds very familiar in some of my old workplaces. And there's certain occupations that still exist that I do think were sanctuaries, let's say, for someone with a neuro-divergent brain. And I think old school newsrooms were one of those places. I really do.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I never thought about that. I completely agree with that. And you brought up the issue of self-image and how people feel about themselves and self-esteem. And most of the people who are contacting me for ADHD coaching are people who are adults and have gotten a diagnosis later in life. And when that's the case and you actually don't get diagnosed or nobody picked up on it, or this is just, people are starting to talk about it now. So now it's, more in the forefront. And so people are seeking out diagnoses. That can really, take a hit on your self-esteem. It can also, on the flip side, it can also help you to recognize, and coaching does this too, what are your strengths and how can you use them and how can you stop swimming upstream? So part of, I would say, even though people come to me and they say, I have issues with time management, I have issues with organizing my space, whatever it is, in the end, when we do go deeper, a lot of it is about how you want to show up and how you take care of yourself and how you can be the best version of yourself.
I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you that we didn't talk about, but a lot of questions are coming to my mind. For instance, one of them is, how do you see social media affecting people with a type of neuro-divergent disorder, or we won't call it a disorder, ADHD, for instance. A lot of people, whether they have ADHD or not, struggle with that as almost like a self-soothing mechanism, and one that isn't particularly healthy, productive, or useful. In some cases, maybe it is, but I'm not sure. Have you seen that in your work at all? Like a dependence?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, first of all, it's important to know that statistics show that people who have ADHD have approximately 50% higher chances to have any kind of addiction, whether it be social media addiction or drugs or porn, anything and everything in terms of addiction. But what's important to understand is that if we're really going to simplify ADHD, it's a dysregulation of the dopamine in your brains. So in their brains. So people with ADHD are constantly seeking dopamine. And social media now is probably one of the worst things for that dopamine, because it's giving people dopamine hits. And this is all people, all brains. It's giving us these short dopamine hits. So we're spiking in the dopamine, and then we put the phone down. And then our brain is saying, pick that back up again, because our brain just got the reward by getting the dopamine. So you pick it up again and you get another dopamine hit. And as the French say, ainsi de suite. So it just, and then, by the end of the day, you're like, wow. And you can look at your phone and you say, wow, I just spent 6 hours on my phone doing absolutely nothing. Right. So yes, this social media and just screens, I guess, also in general, it definitely feeds into the ADHD characteristics. It is not beneficial for any of us, but especially people with ADHD, for sure.
Do you ever, in your coaching, give people frameworks or homework or worksheets or things like that? Like, there are some people that find that very helpful. Do you give them, if people are coming to you, it's like, how do I just need someone to tell me what to do. Are you able to kind of walk them through something that may or may not work for them, but at least something to start with?
So I think it's important to make that distinction. I am not a consultant, and I'm not a trainer, I'm not a teacher. So coaching is very much about me listening attentively to the person when I'm coaching them and asking them pertinent questions to help them to connect the dots. So I'm not going to give homework to somebody. I'm not going to tell them, I'm not going to analyze them like a therapist would, and I'm not going to tell them what I think is best for them, because I believe that their brains, we say NCRW, naturally creative, resourceful, and whole. I don't believe that people's brains are broken. Like you often hear that.
Would that be the new
milieu.
name, NCRW?
Could be. I like that. To get back to what you were asking about the structure of the session, so after we do that debriefing about what they learned about themselves in between sessions, then we start exploring the topic of the day and go into that deeper. And again, this is me asking questions and listening attentively. And then what comes out of that in a very organic way are these action steps that the person is going to, again, decide for themselves. So for instance, if a person is having trouble with time management and they say, it's so hard for me to get out the door on time for work. And so once we've explored that subject, they're able to say, so I'll say, so what are the action steps that you'd like to take? And I use that plural action steps, but it actually is often just one thing, one small actionable step that a person can do in order to feel like that they succeeded. And then you start to retrain the brain to say, I can do that. And then the person will do it again. And, I can do that. But it has to be a small actionable step. And very often people with ADHD are kind of, again, thinking bigger picture. And they often get very overwhelmed about these small actionable steps. But when you break things down into different steps and you just take this first small step, it actually is very, very helpful. So again, this is something that the client decides and not me. So no, I don't give them homework. They give themselves homework.
So you're not like giving them Excel spreadsheets with like, okay, from 5 a.m. to 5:15, you're going to brush your teeth and da-da-da-dee-dee-dee-dee.
Not at all. Not at all.
Okay. Well,
ChatGPT can help with those things, though.
Really?
Yes. I actually just had one of my clients that she said to me, she took a picture of her room, which was disorganized, of her apartment, bedroom, whatever, which was disorganized, and she plugged it into ChatGPT, and she said, I have ADHD. I want a quick program over a 2-day period in order for me to organize my space. And ChatGPT came up with a program that was adapted to her brain, and she followed the program, and she went back and asked a few more questions along the way over the course of the weekend, and voila, and that was the end. And she succeeded in her task.
See, these are the AI stories I like to hear. Yeah. These are the ones that are, helpful.
Exactly.
Not like, oh, we set AI loose on the internet for 1 hour and it came back a racist. Do you know what I mean? Those are the scary stories.
AI, and in particular ChatGPT, can be very, very helpful with people with ADHD, and especially, like I was saying, about breaking down tasks when something's overwhelming, for sure.
So I wanted to ask you a question that's, I know, super sensitive for a lot of people, and it's also outside a lot of people's purview, right? It's more of a how to interact with the medical world, and that's about ADHD medication. I should say I have heard some people incredulous about ADHD as a whole. There's also the theory that ADHD is widely diagnosed in younger boys. And there was a trend in the 90s in the US when pharmaceutical companies were allowed to advertise to your average consumer, where a lot of people were getting diagnosed with a lot of things by a general practitioner. And I think fast forward 25 years, you have a lot of people really terrified of medication, and they don't think it's useful. And then on the flip side, you have a lot of people that want medication very badly. They want it to help. They want anything that will help. And you have doctors that are quick with the prescription, and doctors who will, at all costs, I don't want to say deprive, but at all costs not give the medication. So where do you see that culture in France at the moment? Is it all over the place like everywhere else, or is there, you said France was sort of slow to adapt. How does that work in regard to medication? And by medication, there's different medication other than just like amphetamine, right? There's a wide variety. I'm not sure what they are, but from what I understand,
there is a wide variety that exists and that is available in the United States. This is not the case in France. And I think that does reflect a wariness, which I don't think is a bad thing. What's important to know is that the French health ministry, what they call in French the Haute Autorité de Santé, has decided in relation to ADHD, they've all gotten together and decided that there are four parts of this multimodal treatment that are important in order for people to manage their ADHD. One is to work with a professional organizer. One is to work with an ADHD coach. One is to work with a therapist or a psychologist. And the other is to work with a psychiatrist and get medication. So ADHD is very particular in that if you come at it from all those different angles, you'll be able to better manage your ADHD. Now, not everybody has the time, has the energy, has the finances to be able to do that, but that is the recommendation in any case. So medication just on its own, we like to say that pills don't teach skills. And I think that that's very important to know, that just to take a pill and think it's going to be, a miracle pill and that it's going to solve all of your problems. No. And I think that people, as it becomes more available, people have a tendency to think that. And I think that's a little bit of a trap.
One of the things I really do like about the French culture, although sometimes they are too hesitant, I do like that they are thorough. What you just said about needing to attack this issue from several places. Not only do you have this kind of therapist, but also that kind of therapist, and then a separate person talking about medication, that you have these checks and balances to treat this type of neuro-divergence. And it makes me think about when you work with a client, just because they are or are not on medication, it might just make your coaching slightly different or the program slightly different.
It doesn't change anything for me and for our coaching, other than, if afterwards, if they've decided to take action steps and they're not, and the medication can be beneficial for them to follow through with things, to initiate a task, to complete a task. So But again, it's very, very individual. One of the most important qualities that I have is not to be judgmental. So I really feel that it's a very individual decision, and it's one that they should be making with their psychiatrist, with their doctor. And I don't intervene. In other words, if somebody will ask me something about medication in general, I will say it, but I don't want to have any effect one way or another on their decision, because I respect their decision one way or the other.
And confusion for someone who may or may not be struggling with the symptoms of ADHD as an adult, but they have never been able to kind of sort it out because it's not out in the open. The steps toward how to get diagnosed, define yourself, where to seek help, what's a coach? What's a psychiatrist? Is a psychiatrist appropriate for ADHD, et cetera, et cetera? Everyone knows where to go when they have a stomach ache or when they have a fever that's too high or a broken arm, or even hallucinations, like if we're delving into mental illness, right? They know where to go if they're feeling paranoid, if they're having hallucinations, other types of things like that, or if they're extremely depressed to the point where they can't get out of bed. There are very clear numbers to call. There are very clear steps that I feel like a lot of people know what to do or what they could be doing. And with ADHD and some other forms of neurodivergence, that landscape is very hazy. Do you see a big difference between France and the US or England or other parts of Europe? Or have you primarily just focused on what's going on here?
Yes, primarily focus on what's going on here for sure. But you bring up something important, is that there are a huge amount of misdiagnoses or misdiagnosed people. What I think that I really want to stress here is that there are women whose ADHD went undetected for lots of different reasons, and they were diagnosed with anxiety disorder or bipolar disorder or depression and taking medication for it for years and years and years. And very often, actually, the underlying cause or the underlying disorder was and is ADHD. So that just opens up a whole new, world for them, for these people who are getting these late diagnoses. But again, a lot of times with women, it's a misdiagnosis that they've gotten when they were younger.
For women specifically, the first thing that comes to mind is all these different parts of a woman's life that's very different than a man's life. We've got a monthly cycle. We have puberty. Also, men have puberty. But we have a postpartum. If we have children, we have a postpartum period in which our brain is changing. And our brain changes during pregnancy and after pregnancy. We have another part, which is menopause, which I used to, when I was little, I think it was called metapause. So, I still like to think of it that way. But we have menopause and perimenopause. And during those times, there are neurodivergent symptoms, but they might only be for a short amount of time. And I wonder if there are people out there, I'm sure there are people out there that instead of diagnosing for life, that roll with the actual cycle that most women have, whether it's monthly or the life changes that come around, that roll around every 20 to 30 years for us, that these get adjusted. And I'm not sure how exactly that relates to ADHD, but menopause and ADHD, I'm sure, have a lot of overlap. Maybe there was not a neurodivergence prior, but during perimenopause there is, or no?
So you bring up a really interesting point, and there's very little research on this, and this is another way that I would like the landscape to change. There's very little research done on women anyway, in general, as opposed to men, right? We all know that. But especially, so then you add women with ADHD and their hormonal cycles, it just becomes a very, very niche. So what I'm hoping for in the future, that there will be awareness created around that. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that to really simplify things. So at some point in our menstrual cycle, there is a very big dip. This is after ovulation. There's a very big dip in estrogen. And when there is low estrogen, there's actually low dopamine. High estrogen, high dopamine. So this happens on a monthly basis. Also, when we give birth, right after birth, there's this huge drop also too in our estrogen. So this is the part of the reason why there's baby blues, why there's baby brain is what you call it, but it does affect our cognition because of the estrogen, the drop in the estrogen and the drop in the dopamine as well too. So that can really affect how people care for their children, how they show up, how they get to work, how they organize themselves, during that period of time. And then, like you said, there's perimenopause and menopause when the estrogen is also dropping even like close to zero. And a lot of women who I work with, they actually get their diagnosis at that time in life because they think that either they have a brain tumor, they have Alzheimer's, or they don't know what. There's just something wrong. Their brain's not functioning correctly, which is crazy when you think about it. And then they get diagnosed with ADHD. Like,
But would this have been an ADHD that they've always had, or would this be an ADHD that is a result of the way in which women just roll through neurodivergence at different times of their life, or nobody knows yet because the science isn't there?
So for the moment, nobody actually believes and thinks that that people actually develop ADHD because there is this hereditary component. Okay.
The current wisdom is in the
Exactly.
scientific community that you're born with it.
Thank
that
you for being so
can't-
eloquent putting this out.
But you can't develop it.
That's correct. That's correct. So it will show, it might come out at different points in your life. People are able to mask at points in their lives better, and then all of a sudden it will kind of reveal itself. But no, they don't believe that this is something that is developed later on in life.
So thank you, Robynne, so much for joining us. I mean, again, there is a lot unknown in the general population about ADHD and how it is received and regarded in France. So thank you so much for coming and shedding some light on that for us. Can our listeners find out more about you and your services?
Absolutely. I'm on the regular platforms, the general platforms, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. I have a website, which I think that you will put in the show notes.
Absolutely. But if you just want to say it on air, that would be helpful too.
It's just my name, www.robynnependariès.com. Thank you for asking. And also on my website, there is a tab that says free resource. And if people want to click on that and give me their email address, I will not use it for promotional purposes, but I will send them something called the Daily Focus Sheet. And this is something that I have developed with my ADHD clients. It's just a sheet of paper. Either you can fill it out online or you can print it up and write it. And it just allows you to focus on just what is happening during the day and not be overwhelmed and try to plan the rest of your life.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And I hope we have you, because I know that you're involved in a lot of different things here in Paris and the Paris region. And I hope to have you on World Radio Paris again to just, chew the fat about any number of things.
Thank you very much. Yes, I am involved in Message, which you mentioned in the beginning, which is a great organization. Also AAWE, which is the Association for American Women in Europe. It's a fantastic group. And last but not least, Cancer Support France. I know that you are going to have them as well as a guest, so I volunteer for this English-speaking support group that is free and confidential for people in France. I thought that was important to mention. So thank you for supporting that charity as well.
Oh, thank you so much. I mean, it's great content for us, and I think it's very, very important to have people, our listeners, just be exposed to all these different things via the radio and cool conversations. So thank you for being a part of that.
Thanks so much for having me.